And this actually comes from Pastor's sermon last week. This is a phrase from it. Christians have been called the American Taliban. I want to talk about that a little bit. And the idea here is liberals and how they view the world, and how we have trouble communicating with liberals because their worldview is so different from ours. And so generally as conservatives, we use words to try to convey meaning. So if we're putting together an argument to impress somebody or get somebody to do something or think about something, we'll do it logically. We'll put together a bunch of good reasons and put those into words and tell them, here's why you should do this or you shouldn't do this. Liberals, it's less common that way. They tend to use words to convey emotions, and often they use that tactically to achieve goals that they want to achieve. And to explain that a little bit better, if you think of an angry child, what an angry child might say to another child is, you stinky, stinky poo-poo. And so that's just name calling, right? It doesn't literally mean you stink. It's just the worst thing I could possibly say about you. And what it means is I hate you. Whatever you've done has offended me, and I hate you. And so what the child is trying to do is they're trying to hurt the other person in the way that they've been hurt. And this is actually a manipulation effort. It's trying to get that person to change because you're angry. And so it's an emotional argument rather than a logical argument. And these same children who do this, some of them grow up physically, but not so much mentally, and they still rely on this same kind of argumentation. They still try to do emotional arguments rather than logical arguments. And so, being adults, they use bigger words and different words, and they might say Christians are the American Taliban. And that sounds like they're making a logical argument. It says there's a correlation between what Christians do and what the Taliban does. But if you ask them and you say, in what way are we like the Taliban? How does that make any sense? You'll find out that they don't have an answer to that, because it's not that kind of an argument. They'll say something like, well, first of all, they'll probably just kind of look stunned that you asked that question because they don't have an answer for it. And then they'll probably say something like, well, I can't believe you don't understand what I mean by that. And that's because it's not meant to be a logical argument. It's meant to be an emotional argument. So what they're really trying to say is, I hate you like I hate the Taliban. And so it's an expression like that. It isn't meant to be that there's a real relationship or some way to compare the Taliban with Christians. It's just an emotional statement. So keep that in mind here. And I have another quote that came up this week that I thought fit well into this. And that was this quote from an article that said, MSNBC anchor says the dehumanization caused by GOP parental rights bills is comparable to Russian soldiers raping children in Ukraine. Now you'd say, in what way does that GOP bill have anything to do with soldiers raping children? It doesn't. It's not that kind of an argument. It isn't meant to be a logical argument like that. It's meant to be an expression of I hate what you're doing as much as I hate soldiers raping children in the Ukraine. So whenever you hear those kind of things, understand it in that way. It's not meant to be a logical argument, but it's set up to look like it's a logical argument. Now this is actually going to lead into Colossians, so it does make some sense here. So looking at things from both sides here, if you remember back to when Israel was introducing Christmas, well, not Christmas, Advent to NHU, and a number of people approached him and said, we don't think you're doing the right thing. He called a meeting, and we all got together to meet with him about that. But at that meeting, I think some of us knew it already, nothing was going to happen. The purpose of the meeting was not for us to get a chance to convince him. He had already decided what he was going to do. The purpose of the meeting was for us to vent off our frustrations, and then we would go away having vented, and he thought that would be enough. And so, but it was the same way. The people on our side, on the conservative side, stood up and some read from the Bible and said, here, this is what the Bible says, and some made arguments about put these verses in the Bible together, and so they're all Bible-based logical reasoning that we're trying to use with him, but that doesn't reach him. What reaches him is much more of emotional arguments, but those aren't the kind of arguments that we're prepared to even generate. We don't think that way. And so we're sort of talking in different directions entirely. We were trying to make arguments that made no sense to him, and his ideas made no sense to us, so it was a pointless exercise right from the start. And so liberals can often be seen to be frustrated when we do things like that. They don't understand why we don't understand them. And same thing with conservatives. So when we're frustrated, we say, I've made this logical argument. I've put all these good reasons together. Why are you ignoring it? Why doesn't that make any sense to you? And liberals on their side, they say, I've made it clear how much I hate what you're doing. Why do you keep doing it? And so they have that different perspective on things. And it makes it hard for them to communicate at all. And another problem in there that's not really related to this is the different uses of words. Both sides will use the same word, but have different meanings that they have for that word. And that makes it really hard to communicate. And this actually relates to Christians, not just liberals, but liberal Christians and conservatives. So conservatives read the Bible to understand the words and the sentences, and that's what I do in my lessons. I try to dig into what the words mean and the sentences that come out of those words and put that all together into bigger concepts. And when you do that, anybody who does that and goes to the Bible with that point of view comes away with a single view of God. There's only, if you put everything that's there, you get these fundamental ideas about who God is, or what salvation is, the plan of salvation, how the Jews fit into that, all those sorts of things. If you're reading it to understand what it says, you come up with these ideas that are really foundational ideas. And throughout all of Protestantism, you'll see a large agreement on all these basic ideas of who Jesus was, all of that stuff. But certainly there are some people who don't have a complete understanding and they make mistakes because of that. And there are people who are incorrect about what they've understood because they haven't fully understood it yet. So there's certainly some exceptions to that. But when you compare all of these churches, you can see that there's a core there, a core agreement on really foundational principles. But when liberals read the Bible, they read it for how they feel about it and not to build up an understanding of God. So the result is that each person comes away, each liberal reader comes away from the Bible with his own understanding. And this is built largely on his understanding, his self-understanding of how the world should work. So what he gets from that, and you see that in all the liberal churches, that almost every person in a liberal church has a different idea about who God is and what God is and how salvation works. And there's no agreement at all. And that's because each person is not reading the Bible for what it says. They're reading the Bible to fit it into their understanding, to emotionalize it and make it become real to them. So I hope that helps you a little bit in understanding how difficult it is to communicate with people who are on the far, far left for us.